We all have habits, and the habits that we have help us get through the day. Believe it or not, accept it or not, we all run on automatic for much of our life. This is not a bad thing because we probably could not get anything done if we had to consciously think about every move we were going to make and every task that we wanted to complete. So think about the positive habits that you have. What are the positive habits that you have? So some of the habits that I have are, I get ready often in the same routine every morning. I walk my dogs on the same route every day. I have the same routine, kind of getting ready to go to bed every night. Okay? Many of our habits not only help us get things accomplished, but they also bring us a sense of comfort and and help us kind of know what to expect. But here's the problem. We're also running on automatic in our personal and our professional lives. So let me talk a little bit about what I mean by that. What I mean is that, thank you, Tanner, is that we all have very set patterns of behavior. So that when A happens, we respond like B. And much of the time, we may not even be aware that we have this pattern because it's what we've always done. This becomes a problem when our personal or professional relationships are affected by these unconscious patterns. So let me give you a couple examples about what I'm talking about. So let's say that you are in a leadership role. And whenever someone asks you a question about something that you share with them or that you ask them to do, they ask you a question about it. And you become defensive because you interpret their question as a challenge to your leadership position. And you snap back at them. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but sometimes it may be a challenge to your leadership. But it probably is not always a challenge. Sometimes people just need more information. So one of the patterns would be whenever someone questions your authority or your opinion, that your immediate response is to see that as a challenge to yourself and to respond in a defensive manner. In a personal relationship, let's say you're in a new dating relationship and your partner does not answer a text or a call from you until the next day. And I know that is like huge for a lot of people if they don't respond really quickly to a text or a call. So this is someone new in your life, and your experience tells you that they're ignoring you when they don't respond. And in turn, your response to that is that when they do respond, you then respond in a delayed manner, and you might be a little more cold in what you say in your text or your phone call. Because we are worried that they're becoming disinterested, and we want to protect ourselves from being the one to get hurt. The result in both of the examples, the professional and the personal, is that the relationship is going to suffer, and over time, the other person is actually going to change their behavior towards us. In the case of the leadership position, you may have an employee who becomes hesitant to ask clarifying questions and ends up doing something wrong because they were uncomfortable asking you a clarifying question for fear that you were going to become defensive to them. In the partner case, we set ourselves up to be rejected because the other person feels we're pulling away when we respond in a delayed and a cold manner. So the problem is that no one is able to perceive or interpret all interactions perfectly, and there are going to be times when we're wrong about our immediate assumptions that kick us into A equals B habits. But because we have created these unconscious habits, we treat all circumstances that resemble A with the response of B. So remember, habits help us to feel secure and comforted. We know what to expect when we have a habit. So we label interactions that look like each other like others in the past, because it brings us some comfort and some belief that we kind of know what to expect, right or wrong. So there's a lot of things we can do to work on this, but the first thing we have to do is actually acknowledge that we have patterns in the way that we communicate and the way we deal with stress and conflict. And the next step is to start to identify and become conscious of these patterns. In other words, we need to rev up our introspective awareness and begin to understand and notice our communication and our conflict habits. And then work to ensure that when the habit kicks in, it's an appropriate response. Just like if I'm staying at a family member's home for the night, my bedtime routine is probably going to be different there, and it's appropriate that I change it there. I can't always do the same thing when I am in a different setting. This is a lot of work, and so we're only going to talk about the very first step of dealing with this, if you want to, tonight. And it is a lot of work, and that's why so few people actually do it. So, to change a habit, we first have to acknowledge the habit, and when it's an automatic or unconscious behavior, this becomes much more difficult and problematic. So what you have to do is, after a difficult exchange with someone where you felt triggered, you need to take a few minutes and sit quietly and reflect on the event in an honest manner with yourself. And become curious about what happened, why you responded the way that you did to what happened. Is there another explanation for what the other person was doing or saying, other than what you assumed? And was your response appropriate for what was happening in the situation? Do you feel good about the way that you behaved? And if not, what was the habit or the automatic response that kicked in? What does it look like? And what were you telling yourself in terms of a story when that habit kicked in? The reason it's important to be quiet and do this in a quiet place is that we need our frontal cortex so that we can think about it. And when we're in a stressful situation, the first part of our brain that goes offline is our prefrontal cortex. So you really can't do this until you become much more aware of it and conscious of it. You can't really reflect on it unless you really take time to sit quietly and honestly reflect. So, we will talk more about this in the future, but the first step, if you want to make this change, is to start noticing what are your communication and your conflict habits. And those, you have some really good ones too, so check those out. You have some really great habits that when A happens, you do B. And it may be that, when someone, is doing, is clear that they need some comfort, that you just start listening and you don't talk to them and you don't interject yourself. So start noticing and becoming a little bit more conscious of how you communicate, how you respond in stressful and conflicted situations, and which of those you feel good about and which of those you don't feel good about. And reflect on both of them, because how you respond in the good ones is going to help you better understand how you can shift the ones that you're not as happy about. So, first step is, when you have a few moments as soon as you can after the interaction. Do some introspection. Learn more about the when, why, how you ended up on that habit train. And maybe even write it down. And start becoming conscious of what you do when you are communicating with others in a stressful situation or in a conflicted situation. So that's kind of the first step, is figure out what are your habits. And once you identify them, then we can talk a little bit more about what you do next to start bringing